This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Outside of the US, in the rest of the Western world, Donald Trump isn't the most popular politician. His first term coincided with an unprecedented collapse in America's global reputation, at least amongst its allies, and YouGov polling ahead of the 2024 election found that voters in the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Sweden and Denmark would all vote for Harris by overwhelming margins if they were able to. However, one place where Trump really is popular is Israel. Channel 12 polling from late October suggested that an overwhelming 66% majority of Israelis wanted Trump to win the presidency, with just 17% of Israelis saying they preferred Harris. And Israeli politicians reacted to his re-election with jubilation. In a post on X, for instance, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the results as the greatest comeback ever, while his far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich announced that 2025 would be the year of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, essentially implying that Israel plans to use Trump's return to annex the West Bank, which didn't go down well with the international community. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why Trump is so popular in Israel, what his Israel policy might end up looking like, and why he might not end up being quite as staunchly pro-Israel as Netanyahu and co. assume. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's get straight into it and start with the big question. Why are Israelis and the Israeli government so keen on Trump? Well, it's in part because Netanyahu and the Israeli right think that Biden has been too critical of Israel, and worry that Harris would be even more so. But it's mainly because Trump was pretty pro-Israel during his first term in office. His Israel policies included moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, cutting funding to UNRWA, the UN agency for Palestinian refugees, and reversing decades of US policy by recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which Israel seized from Syria in 1967. Trump's administration even announced that the US no longer considered Israeli settlements in the West Bank to be in violation of international law, going against the position implicitly endorsed by the Obama administration in late 2016, and flirted with actually supporting Israel's formal annexation of the occupied parts of the West Bank in early 2020. In this context, you can see why his re-election has triggered the response it has from Netanyahu and his allies. But it's at least possible that Trump won't be quite as unequivocally pro-Israel as Netanyahu and co. apparently assume. For starters, Trump no longer has a great personal relationship with Netanyahu. While they apparently got on pretty well during Trump's first term, Trump really soured on Netanyahu after he immediately bubbled up to Joe Biden once he won the 2020 election. In an interview with Israeli journalist Barak Ravid in December 2021, Trump said, "F Bibi. Bibi could have stayed quiet. He's made a terrible mistake." There were also a couple of moments in the campaign where Trump sounded surprisingly ambiguous. While he did spend most of the campaign insisting he did more for Israel than any other president and that he was Israel's best friend, he also said that Israel was, quote, losing the PR war by releasing the most heinous, most horrible tapes of buildings falling down. Trump even appeared to agree with a Genocide Joe chant at one of his rallies, when he turned to the crowd and said, "They're not wrong." But the big reason that Trump might clash with Netanyahu is that he's always branded himself as the deal maker. During the campaign, he promised to end the wars, and even said in April that Israel should, quote, get back to peace and stop killing people. But Trump's enthusiasm for quick deals will put him at odds with the Israeli leadership, because, well, Netanyahu's maximalist war aims in Gaza, namely destroying Hamas, whatever that means, can't be achieved any time soon. Netanyahu is unlikely to agree to anything that falls short, because a pause before that point would embarrass him, and probably mean new elections, which he'd lose. There's a similar dynamic in Lebanon, where Israel's war aims seem to be constantly expanding, and it's hard to imagine the current Israeli government accepting anything short of the complete removal of Hezbollah. Basically, if Trump pushes for a deal, Netanyahu is going to resist, because any pause in the fighting before Hamas and Hezbollah are somehow totally destroyed will probably lead to his political downfall. Interestingly, a similar dynamic nearly played out in Trump's first term, when Trump tried to solve the Israel-Palestine problem. To do this, he literally didn't talk to the Palestinians, only the Israelis, and he, along with Netanyahu and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, came up with an unsurprisingly pro-Israel plan, where Israel was basically allowed to keep the land in the West Bank that had been occupied by settlers and most of Jerusalem. In practice, this meant that Palestinians only got about 70% of the West Bank, and the territory was completely non-contiguous. This was widely perceived by both the Palestinians and the international community as being unfair to Palestine, and the Palestinian leadership did actually reject it. But what's interesting is that the plan only fully collapsed because, at least according to journalist Thomas Friedman, the pro-settler right-wingers in Netanyahu's government also rejected it, on the grounds that they worried that ceding any land at all to the Palestinians would pave the way to a Palestinian state, which they saw as unacceptable. In other words, Trump tried to make a deal, so asked Netanyahu, "What do you want?" Netanyahu said 30% of the West Bank, keep all the settlements, and basically all of Jerusalem, and Trump said, fine, only for Netanyahu to say, actually, I can't accept my own deal. Netanyahu got out of this diplomatic mess with the Abraham Accords, which essentially ignored the Palestinian issue and instead focused on normalizing Israel's relations with other Arab countries. But if doing a deal with Netanyahu on Palestine was difficult in Trump's first term, it's going to be even more difficult in his second. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that Trump won't be pro-Israel. Ultimately, no one knows what Trump's Israel policy is going to be, and a lot will depend on how much influence his cabinet has, given they're overwhelmingly pro-Israel, especially his Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Israel ambassador Mike Huckabee, who, to give you a sense of quite how pro-Israel he is, once said there's really no such thing as a Palestinian, and there's no such thing as the West Bank, it's Judea and Samaria. There is no such thing as settlements, they're communities, they're neighbourhoods, they're cities. There's no such thing as an occupation. Nonetheless, the point we're trying to make is that if Trump wants to protect his image as the no-nonsense deal-maker who keeps the world in check, he might well push for a deal in the Middle East, and this probably will put him at odds with both Netanyahu and much of the Israeli right. Now, as a TLDR viewer, it's clear that you have a thirst for learning. After all, why else would you have watched a 10-minute video explaining Trump's Israel policy? Now, if you want to continue your learning journey, you really should check out Brilliant. Brilliant is the online learning platform where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. These hands-on lessons have you comparing circuits to understand voltage and current, playing snooker to learn the rules of collision, planning your itinerary for an intergalactic music festival on a space-time diagram, and more. That way, you'll build your natural intuition while gaining deep knowledge of scientific principles. In fact, Brilliant actually recently launched tons of new data science content, all of which uses real-world data to help you see trends and make better informed decisions. And don't worry, you don't need to be a world-renowned scientist to understand these courses either. Brilliant's courses are designed for learners of any level. Find out more and to try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR or click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support and thanks to Brilliant for supporting this video.